It is clear that countries will need to rethink and reorganize how they match the supply of skills to the rapidly evolving needs of job markets, not just in terms of the formal education system, but also the mechanisms for lifelong learning and for strengthening cognitive and creative capacities. Other areas where we need to move early is in the design and implementation of our social protection systems. In this context, some of the TFM experts call for adapting the social contract to these evolving contexts. They suggest experimenting with proposals for technological unemployment insurance, for example, or guaranteed income policies, or a range of other compensatory social policies. In some other areas, there is greater clarity about the mechanisms and the impact of technological change. New materials, digital, bio, and nanotechnologies, and artificial intelligence all hold great promise for a range of high-efficiency water and renewable energy systems that could be deployed in all countries, regardless of their state of development. Such technological innovations can catalyze our move towards sustainability. But at the same time, there can also be environmental costs. Large-scale artificial intelligence systems require tremendous amounts of power. This is especially so for the multi-layered neural networks that bring software closer to the processes used during human cognition and decision-making. The rapidly increasing electricity demand for cryptocurrency mining, for example, is a reminder that technologies that appear to be mostly virtual can in fact have outsized and unwelcome real footprints. As of May 2018, Bitcoin alone accounted for an estimated 68 terawatt-hours of electricity consumption annually, comparable to the electricity consumption of the Czech Republic, 6 times the demand of 1 year ago. Despite efficiency increases, artificial intelligence and all other emerging technology clusters will require ever-increasing amounts of electricity with associated pollution costs. They also produce e-waste and nano-waste and chemical wastes, each of which comes with its own set of issues. Clearly, then, it would be wise to incorporate environmental considerations into the design of these technologies from the outset. And improve our knowledge and understanding of we need to improve our understanding of these trends as the basis for well-founded actions and policies. A forward-looking perspective, coherent and plausible scenarios, and more robust quantitative approaches can help us in this regard. One idea that has been put forward is to build partnerships and interfaces with universities, labs, innovation incubators, and private sector entities at the forefront of this technological change as a way of facilitating the exchange of information and policy insights. There's been great increase in the international collaboration in scientific research, which has become much more global, and that opens itself a whole range of new opportunities for stronger engagement with developing country institutions. There is also a call for a more responsible and ethical deployment of such technologies. And this call has to be balanced against concerns that excessive restraint on innovations could deprive humanity of many of its benefits. The ethical and normative considerations that should guide our thinking on these issues have to spring from our shared vision, the values contained in the UN Charter, the Declaration on Human Rights, and most recently in the Rio +20 outcome, the future we want, as well as the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Finally, one of the more striking takeaways from the IATT work is its vivid demonstration of the need to think across sectors and across narrowly defined stakeholder boundaries. There is a very clear need for a continuing multi-stakeholder dialogue to present differing perspectives and to arrive at a shared understanding and establish trust among the different stakeholders. The setting provided by the TFM is a particularly valuable one for contributing to these objectives at the global level. Ladies and gentlemen, rapid technological change is clearly among us, and it is not going away. The scope and scale of its impacts, both positive and negative, and across the full range of economic, social, and environmental dimensions, require us to engage proactively with these issues. These preliminary findings of the TFM stand to be further refined through discussion at this forum and beyond. But they also serve to indicate a central set of areas of work where collaborative, multi-stakeholder and multi-sectoral contexts of the TFM will add value and advance understanding at global, regional, and national levels. I look forward to further fruitful and constructive discussion throughout this session and the rest of the forum, and I thank you for your attention. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias a usted.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harris. From what we've just heard, it's an excellent, though preliminary report. And as you have mentioned, this technological change has arrived. We're living it, and it's here to stay. So in this organization, we have to work to analyze it, to see its impact, and see how we can carry out the SDGs. I next invite the Vice Chair of the 21st session of the Commission on Science and Technology for Development, Mr. Peter Major, to provide an update regarding the work of the Commission on its recently concluded 21st session, and which also dealt with technological change. Thank you very much. You have 7 minutes, sir.
Mr. Moderator, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I have been warned that we are running out of time, so I should be short. I have 4 pages, so I have the impossible task of reducing to 5 to 7 minutes. But a try. Especially after the very interesting remarks we had this morning about the achievements of the technology and the increasing gaps. So I've come here to give you some more optimistic remarks about the UN Commission on Science and Technology for Development, which had its 21st session this May in Geneva, with a record number of ministers, high-level representatives, officials, science advisors, permanent representatives, NGOs in attendance to engage in a stimulating dialogue. Experts in various scientific fields, including big data, artificial intelligence, space, satellite technology, synthetic biology, as well as on ICT, SDI policy and foresight, share their experiences and insight on the opportunities and challenges brought about by the rapid technological change. The deliberations also benefited from the country reports from around the world and from UNCTAD's Technology and Innovation Report 2018, entitled Harnessing Frontier Technologies for Sustainable Development. It is evident that the technological change in these fields is having broad impact on the economy, society, and the environment. The application of some of these technologies represents an opportunity to address the SDGs, in particular goals related to health, agriculture, education, and financial inclusion. At the same time, they pose new challenges for policymakers and the society, involving potential risk of exacerbating existing economic, social, and technological divides, as well as raising ethical questions. Ladies and gentlemen, the Commission was informed about the broad range of applications of big data analytics, from tackling traffic congestion and developing sustainable transport systems to improving health through customized medicine specific to each patient's needs. For example, typhoid outbreak in Uganda, the Ministry of Health used data mapping applications to facilitate the allocation of medicine and mobilization of health teams. It was also brought to the attention of the Commission the fact of the convergence of technologies predominantly on digital platforms, which are accelerating technological advancements. In India, for example, a startup enterprise provides analytics and software solutions for crop management and has developed a vegetation index using satellite imagery that provides support to farmers and decision-making to ensure crop health. Space and satellite technologies are used to tackle a multitude of sustainable development challenges. They produce critical information such as about climate and weather patterns to predict things like tropical cyclones and vegetation levels for assessing the status of crops to respond to food security and drought concerns. The CSD considered the potential of synthetic biology and gene editing to tackle health-related challenges. They may help one day to reduce waiting time for patients on transplant lists. Gene editing, for example, has profound implications for any life forms in our planet. Combined with artificial intelligence and big data, they create scientific breakthroughs by decoding a large volume of information from species to help us build understanding of not only human health, but also life forms on the planet. Ladies and gentlemen, while these technological advancements hold great potential for positive impact on achieving the SDGs, we do not yet know all the implications, as it has been already mentioned. For example, technologies such as AI can eliminate some jobs while creating others. Also, the net effect remains uncertain. There are concerns about the polarization of jobs and in particular the potential impact on women. Several experts voiced concern over the implications for citizens' rights, privacy, data ownership, and online security. They underscored the need for effective institutional frameworks and regulatory regimes for data collection, use, and access, for data privacy and security. They highlighted the importance of addressing the ethical and safety issues related to genetic manipulation, as well as called for better mechanisms for identifying health hazards from emerging technologies. Participants also noted the importance of linking traditional knowledge with the new insights from modern science. Ladies and gentlemen, let me share with you a special experience which was after the first high-level discussion of our annual meeting. For 1 hour, government ministers and civil society representatives in attendance could tap into the great minds of Professor Penrose, of Oxford University professor, who has made significant impact in the world of mathematics, quantum mechanics, and physics. And Professor Dubochet, the Swiss Nobel Prize laureate in chemistry, whose work has often been linked to social issues. Both eminent scientists expressed their views about ethical questions in science, including remaining in control of all devices. Both of them emphasized the important role of the UN and the specialized agency that they should have in these questions related to science. The dialogue was followed by a QA session, which allowed participants to engage in an enriching dialogue. Ladies and gentlemen, the annual session of the CSTD also focused on capabilities with relation to the digital skills. And it also emphasized that bridging the digital gaps is very important. Some countries reported very positive results, including Bolivia, Bulgaria, Canada, Cuba, the Dominican Republic, Germany, Kenya, Latvia, Lesotho, Malta, Poland, Turkey, Uganda, the UK, and the USA, and Zambia. For example, Bolivia has introduced e-government, Cuba is implementing a national plan for development, the Dominican Republic has implemented a digital republic program based on education supported by technology. Lesotho has introduced ICT from early years of learning. South Africa adopted a national development plan to achieve the SDGs. Zambia has introduced a policy to ensure access of students to computers and promote early exposure to ICT and science. Many countries also reported on their overall strategies to harnessing STI with a focus on new and emerging technologies. I will have my paper for about 1 minute. Okay. In conclusion, participants reiterated the essential role of international collaboration, improving human capacity in emerging technologies by facilitating collaborative research, technology transfer, and dissemination of knowledge on best practices in developing countries. Highlighted in the UNCTAD Technology Innovation Report, the least developed countries in particular should receive international support to build capabilities. In this regard, I'm pleased to report that as a follow-up to commitments made its previous session, UNCTAD and the government of China will organize capacity building workshops in the later part of 2018 for CSTD member states from developing regions focusing on STI policy and technology incubator development. Finally, the participants underscored the need for comprehensive assessment and foresight of the effects of technological change. They called on the CSTD as focal point on STI issues within the United Nations to continue to provide a forum for strategic planning and foresight regarding critical trends in science, technology, and innovation in key sectors of the economy, and to draw attention to new and emerging technologies. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for the opportunity to report on CSTD 21 and wish you successful deliberation. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
I thank the Vice Chair of the Commission on Science and Technology for Development. I'd like to ask speakers that because of time constraints, we'll have to adjust downward the time for their statements, which will all be there on the web page. I am now very pleased to welcome the rest of our distinguished panelists for this session, and kindly consider the time issue in your statements. I have on my right, and it's an honor, Her Excellency Sarah Al-Amiri, Minister of State for Advanced Sciences of the United Arab Emirates, Mr. Thomas Philbeck, Head of Science and Technology Studies at the World Economic Forum, and Mr. Goran Marabi, President and Chief Executive Officer of the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, ICANN. As I said, perhaps you can also refer to the issue at hand, and we also welcome our moderator, Ambassador Miguel Ruiz Cabañas, who is Under Secretary for Multilateral Affairs and Human Rights at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Mexico, which starting now will begin to conduct the proceedings and will make a brief statement. You have the floor, sir. Thank you very much, Co-Chair. Good morning to all of you. I'm most grateful for this opportunity of being with you here this morning as moderator. And before I call on the participants, may I just submit to you a matrix which we worked out in the Foreign Ministry in Mexico, where what we tried to see is the very impact which accelerated technological impact on achieving sustainable development targets. I'd like this to be put on the screen.
Después de que se aprobó la
After the adoption of Resolution 72-242, we began analyzing. Yeah, next, please.
Ahí.
Right there, yes. We began the task of localizing precisely 18 applications of artificial intelligence, and we now have a very clear list of what they are, these applications for AI. Next. And we cross these with all the specific targets contained in the SDG agenda. We identified all the impacts which may be there, positive and negative, of AI on each one of the targets of sustainable development. Next. We realized, obviously, that targets 8 and 9 have most impact: employment, innovation, industry, and so on. And what we did is to focus on those and identify precisely what the impact was. On the left column, you have the 18 application of AI, and on the horizontal column, you see the impacts. What's in green, we think that those are positive impact, and the red are impacts that we believe to be negative. Next. In this matrix, you can find precisely the positive and negative impacts which we found for these two targets. As you can see, in principle, there are many more positive impacts, but there is also a large number of impacts or risks which AI might have on the economies of our countries, particularly the possibilities of eliminating jobs before new jobs are created in sufficient quantities. Here are examples on each one of the objectives and targets which we developed. I believe that in this fashion, what we're trying to determine is how AI has positive impacts and some dangers for the achievement of the SDGs and leaving no one behind. Some of the impacts or risks or challenges represented here imply particularly dislocation of labor markets in the short and medium term and creates greater economic inequalities and disparities within countries and by and between countries. The final goal for us should be simply twofold. The UN must collect information on what is happening, analyze that information, and disseminate it to each and every country. Secondly, the United Nations can help in developing best practices or better practices, exchange of information, so that governments can develop the best possible policies, enabling them to speed up, innovate, and be able to utilize this accelerated technological change, particularly AI, and prevent some of the dangers or risks. With this introduction, let me now give the floor to our distinguished panelists. The Minister of State for Advanced Sciences of the UAE, Ms. Sarah Al-Amiri. You have the floor.
Thank you, moderator and co-chair. I'd like to first start off by saying that it's important to align our challenges in scientific and technological advancement without forgetting both the social and economic benefit from science and technology. That is what the UAE is currently doing with its advanced sciences agenda towards 2031. We need to think of how science can benefit all sectors, and a healthy and competitive science ecosystem does not only help address our challenges, but it goes beyond that to raise the quality of life around the world. Seeking opportunities through science is important. Our most abundant natural resource, oil, is reaching an end of demand towards 2050. We see that as a challenge. Our focus then is on how to better utilize that natural resource and get from it other sources and focus on material sciences so that we can focus on the downstream. That is one way that the UAE is working on capitalizing on science and technology to ensure the development, the continuous development of its ecosystem and the sustainable development of its key sectors within the country. There is a risk in not taking advantage and remaining a mere observer of technological advancement, and that is the worst case, or being a good or decent adopter of technologies that are imported from outside. We can all continue to discuss the benefits of STI, or the uncertainty that it brings about, especially technological advancements in artificial intelligence and other sectors. But we need to better understand the local perspective to be able to get the best solutions. That is what the next wave of technological advancement is all about. Again, we can continue to talk about biotechnology, nanotechnology, 3D printing, data analysis, artificial intelligence. But at the end of the day, all of these are tools that are implemented towards either the Sustainable Development Goals or towards the national goals of any one country or the global goals and addressing the global challenges to move forward. The absence of clear objectives is where technology could be disruptive, especially to economies and corporations who have not built up the resilience or an appetite for change. Science has always defied conventional boundaries and borders and has always expanded to its thirst for exploration. Science has and will always save humanity, and that technology that results from discoveries touches all of our lives. For the SDGs, we need to maximize the impact of data captured from scientific experiments to be able to derive findings from different perspectives and implemented on different realms. This goes beyond open data for science. It is giving access to data that is attained using complex processes and sometimes equipment, and providing that data to scientists globally, enabling them to benefit from it and add on to the global research. Scientists, researchers, and engineers continuously, and that is the nature of the work, deal with the unknown, and they find solutions for them. Engaging them in decision-making and pushing evidence-based policies is important for the world to become better designers of our future. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, señora.
I thank the Minister. I now call on Thomas Philbrick, Head of Science and Technology Studies of the World Economic Forum.
That's being done on, is it on now? Okay, apologies. Thank you again. We at the World Economic Forum are very encouraged by all the STI work that's being done here at the UN, and it's an honor to be here. And precisely because we at the World Economic Forum have been working in this field, as many of you may know, for the last several years around this topic of the fourth industrial revolution, and we've been championing this concept so that we can have a way to connect all of the different facets of change that technology is bringing forward for the world. And for this short set of remarks, I'd like to basically make 3 points in terms of how technologies are impacting us and things that we might need to think about as we go forward, because very often we can get caught up in, well, you know, what should we do in terms of policy recommendation, but just from an STS perspective where I come from, I want to kind of change the mentality for just a moment. Part of the way that we explain the fourth industrial revolution at the forum is to talk about the third industrial revolution as a platform for building and constructing the fourth industrial revolution technologies, which is to say that the digital underpinnings, the interoperable infrastructure are required in order for those technologies to come about. And at the very beginning, those technologies of the infrastructure, the ICT, were meant to connect us all, and that connectivity was seen as an intrinsic good, not an instrumental good. It was simply something that was a good in and of itself. Now, there is great promise from the technologies that are being built on top of that infrastructure, and that's part of the demanding future that we have, is how do we realize the promise that is there? And then part of the issues that we have with this demanding future that is being built on top of that infrastructure is, how is it that we manage our vulnerabilities? And so to think of ourselves as vulnerable isn't something that we might have wanted to come in here to talk about, but thinking of ourselves as vulnerable, both for good and ill, are a way to think about how the scale, the scope, and the speed of technologies might have an impact on us. We are vulnerable in both good and bad ways. At least the technologies are exposing our vulnerabilities in both good and bad ways. They're exposing the risk to an individual, biological integrity, neurological integrity, organizational integrity, community integrity, national integrity, as we've seen in recent events. And also, if you were to go to somewhere like the Future of Humanity Institute, perhaps existential threat at a certain level. So we have a number of different levels of things to think about here in terms of our vulnerability. But they also point out the vulnerabilities that are good for us, the places in the middle that none of us may see individually because they're areas of the common good, or they're areas between borders, or they're areas that require collaboration in order to address. And so the first point is to think about those vulnerabilities and how it is that those technologies that are coming about are able to help us have a better idea of what we can do to move forward. So the second point I'd like to talk about a little bit here is maybe how we envision and talk about technologies matters. And that's why it's such an exciting prospect, or for me to get to come here to talk to all of you, is the idea that the UN is having these discussions here about science, technology, and innovation, because if the discussions are happening here, those propagate downwards and outwards across the world so that other people begin to think about technology in a certain way, talk about technology in a certain way, and kind of embed the metaphors and the types of phrases, the types of tone, the frameworks and framing mechanisms that we use to talk about technologies in their own conversations and people's conversations around the world. Now, this is quite important because if we think backwards from the moonshot, from the Lumiere brothers' shot to the moon as one of the very first movies that was created, to the Jetsons and their flying cars, or a drone taxi, as it were, we build the future we imagine. And we build the future in the way that we talk about it. The Industrial Revolutions gave us this idea of replacement parts. And we started to think about the human being and the human body as having replacement parts. We created the ICT infrastructure and the computer. We created the computer thinking about how humans thought about things, but then we reversed that metaphor, and now we often think about the human being as a biological computer where, you know, the body is the hardware and the mind is the software, et cetera. So the way that we talk about technology matters. And we want to make sure that we don't use language to get ourselves locked in to ways that we can't go forward. We want to make sure that we use language that allows us to be inclusive. We want to make sure that we use language that takes us forward in a positive way, and not just language which is frightening or creates a burning platform where everyone has to run from technology or simply worships it, but something more responsible that meets in the middle. And the third point that I would like to make is to say that if we're going to achieve the future that we aspire to, then inclusion has to be the way, and that's going to be the key, because inclusivity and inclusive development, it's the key to well-being, it's the key to trust, it's the key to closing the divisive gaps, the gender gaps, the educational gaps, the technology gaps. Without inclusion, we won't have a foundation to realize the potential of all of the technologies as they scale. So it's easy to be an optimist in terms of potential and power, the potential and power of technologies themselves, but it's a lot harder to be an optimist in terms of governance, because optimism in governance requires trust, and it has to be earned. And that's why it's fantastic to be able to be here amongst all of you and to see that this is starting here at the UN and going outward. So with that, I'll close it off and say that we should use those frameworks to try and dispel those myths that we often take with us, which I heard earlier this morning, which was that technology is value neutral or that the technology is driving the future. Let's dispel those and start thinking about people and how we think and what we think about technology and how that pushes our agenda forward. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Thomas Velbeck, and I now give the floor to Mr. Goran Mardi, Chair of Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers.
Your Excellencies, dear colleagues, I was thinking about some of the speeches this morning, and I have to excuse myself that I'm actually fairly positive to the phenomenon of Internet itself. And I know there are problems, there are things that has to be discussed, but I can use you as an example of the positive things. I bet that during my speech now, some of you will spend time sharing information with your loved ones, doing travel arrangements or looking for on websites instead. Internet is about sharing information. That's where it started. And I'm going to tell you a secret. When the founding mothers and fathers came up with what we call the Internet, they basically didn't have a clue. They never anticipated 3.5 to 4 billion people on one single network, working together, sharing information, and doing what they do. They didn't know. And we don't know what's going to happen with the Internet tomorrow. What is so strange with this sort of technology is that it was you, the end users, who for some reason decided that you needed something you didn't have before. I'm old. I was 30 years old before the first commercial text message was sent in the world. When I could tell my kids there was no internet, there was no mobile phones, there was no text messages, it just emphasizes how old I am. But for some reason, all of you individually decided you needed this. And this is one of the tricks with internet. Internet is individual and driven by you. It wasn't any government, it wasn't any company, it wasn't anyone else who decided one day to come up with a product called internet. It was the end users of the world who decided they needed this for sharing information. And internet is a strange phenomenon. We talk about this as any other technology in the world, but it's not. Internet doesn't even have a central point. There is no place in the world you can say, here's the box, here is the internet, and here's the red button, you can actually turn it off. It's a really distributed system. What it does have are joint enablers, can sit in different countries, but it doesn't have anything that is a central point. That makes it hard from a government's perspective, because you would like to call someone when something goes wrong, won't you? There should be someone who is responsible. But that's unfortunate, that's not how the system works. ICANN, and we never say the full name, by the way, it's too complicated, is one of those organizations that handles one of those parameters. We provide to you, all internet users of the world, the domain name system. You use the domain name system every time you send an email or go to a web page. We are not alone in this. We also work with our partners in the numbers community who distributes the IP addresses they are using for all your devices. Or, for instance, the IETF, who makes standards for internet users. One of them I bet that you're using every day, which is the voice over IP. You can make telephone calls on the internet. We are all governed by what we call multi-stakeholder models. ICANN has its own parliament consisting of governments, academia, businesses, and other ones who sets the policies for everybody in the world. We are a purely technical organization. And in a way, we were the inventors, or maybe the first one who actually used a pure multi-stakeholder model. Any one of you can walk into an ICANN meeting and participate in the next generation of policies set for the domain name system. The internet is a powerful source. And I think it's time for governments and the UN to engage in the discussion, because the internet has changes on society. Some of them will be good. Some of them will be bad. And governments and elected officials are the right persons to discuss those issues. That should not happen in the technical format that we do. But the road to hell can also be paved with good intentions. We see examples of that. Because the underlying thought about internet is to be able to connect people. We believe that by connecting people, something magical happens. And if this global interconnection is disrupted and fragmentized, you will not have the advantages of making it possible for you to send an email across borders, or making it possible for your country to sell something to some other countries on the line, or just sharing information in science, or being able to work in rural areas instead of just having to move into cities. All those things could be disrupted if we don't govern the principles of the internet the right way. When I said that the inventors and the founders, mothers and fathers of the internet, and there were both, didn't have a clue. It's the same thing that we don't have a clue in the next 5 to 10 years what's going to happen. Because so many of those things are in the hands of the end users. You can decide tomorrow to go to another platform. You can decide to go somewhere else and do something else. That's one of the uniqueness things with internet. Someone in this room can be sitting in a garage somewhere or a living room and come up with something that you can put online, and you can have an audience of 3.5 billion users. That's unique. It's never happened before. Of course it changes society. Of course it also sets a lot of things in perspective when it comes to governance. But internet is not done. I mean, if I ask my kids, it's like everything else. It's a national resource. It's a big sea that you can just plug into. But the first most important of that is that when we talk about 3.5 billion users, I don't know how to calculate that. I always get the numbers. That's too few. But I will claim that the ones who has it today are the elite of the world. They're the people who can afford to go online. Some of them go online just for fun, and some of them is doing it for business needs. The next one is going to be much harder. Not because of the technology itself or the economics about it, it's also that people are smart. If they're going to take some of their money and buy something with, they want to see the value of it. Local data, local information, local websites is more important than you might think. What we are actually creating on this united global network are global villages. People like to know what's happening in their own region, their own country. So one of the things that we are working on in our community is what we call IDNs, the ability for local scripts, where people can use their own scripts, their own language to make searches and go to web pages without even knowing how English works. The fact that you read from left to right with a dot, in many areas of the world, nobody knows that. To be able to do this, because of this ecosystem, we actually have to work together. We in the technical community will do our part. We work very closely to the UN. We work with ITU. We work with GSMA. We work with the development of things. But we need to work together. Otherwise, it won't work. We there with the 3.5 to 4 billion users think that's grand. But the next billion users are going to be much tougher. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias.
I thank Mr. Marby. I will now open the floor. The first speaker is the permanent representative, the ambassador of Turkey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As a member of the core group of exponential technological change, I would like to thank Mexico for bringing the issue of rapid technological change onto the agenda of the United Nations. As the fourth industrial revolution unfolds, the UN should serve as a platform to establish good models for country regulatory frameworks. The United Nations should also support countries to develop their capacity to deal with rapid technological change through partnerships as well as the exchange of experiences and know-how. Scientific and technological innovation constitutes a cross-cutting issue in achieving sustainable development goals. New technologies in several fields, such as crop science, water management, urban planning, and disaster resilience, provide opportunities for supporting member states in achieving SDGs. Digital education, health, energy, and transportation are also among those areas where new technologies open up new possibilities to achieve SDGs. However, they also risk widening the existing gaps between the developed and developing countries unless access of developing countries to technology is promoted and supported. In this vein, Turkey strongly supports strengthening the science, technology, and innovation capacity of the least developed countries to facilitate their technological leapfrogging. I have the pleasure to inform you that Technology Bank for the LDCs, hosted by Turkey, has been officially inaugurated yesterday, June 4th. Deputy Secretary General and the Turkish Minister of Science, Technology and Industry were present at the inauguration. We were also pleased to welcome ministers from Yemen, Guinea, as well as Norway to this inauguration. Technology Bank's operationalization marks the fulfillment of the first SDG target, 17.8, since the adoption of the 2030 Agenda. The bank will strengthen the capacity of the LDCs to develop, integrate, and scale up deployment of technologies and innovations. It will also enhance their capacity to address and manage intellectual property rights issues. The bank will promote development and implementation of national and regional STI strategies. It will also strengthen partnerships among STI-related public entities, private sector, and other stakeholders. As a first step in that direction, a tripartite MOU among the Technology Bank, the Scientific and Technological Research Council of Turkey, and the Global Good Fund was signed on the margins of the inauguration ceremony. We firmly believe that the bank will play a key role in fostering productive capacity, structural transformation, poverty eradication, and sustainable development of LDCs. We call on all partners to support the bank's activities. Thank you.
Thanks to you. The United States.
Su Excelencia Embajador Ruiz Cabaña.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
In the UN, the Science, Technology and Innovation Forum, and the Commission on Science and Technology for Development. It is encouraging to see the connected nature of these discussions, and we support the continued development of such a relationship and continue exploration of frontier science and technology issues in both STI Forum and the CSTD, which, as we know, serve different purposes but bring multiple stakeholders and countries to the table. On the topic at hand, the freedom to explore and invent is a hallmark of the human spirit. Emerging technologies born from this creativity have the potential to create new jobs, fuel the economy, and improve quality of life. We've heard a lot about the potential risk associated with technological change. The United States is focused on the opportunities that emerging technologies provide. As mentioned here, AI holds promise for tremendous societal and economic benefit. It has the potential to revolutionize how we live, work, learn, discover, and communicate. AI is a popular subject at the moment, but as a scientist, I'm a trained developmental neurobiologist, I can honestly say that there are many other technologies to celebrate that will bring many new opportunities for us to harness, from blockchain to genetic engineering, quantum information system, and neurotechnologies. Overemphasizing negative narratives that could close markets, stifle innovation, and inhibit the development and diffusion of highly beneficial tools would, as a consequence, increase the risk of deepening existing divides. In the United States, we try to focus on how to maximize the benefits of existing, new, and emerging technologies, including through the support of basic research, modernizing government, and developing our STEM workforce. We are committed to creating an environment where new technologies can succeed. The United States, for example, takes a holistic approach, providing multiple forms of support for innovation. For instance, the U.S. National Science Foundation, NSF, supports the Industry University Cooperative Research Center that build long-term partnerships among industry, academia, and government. The United States also supports businesses developing next-generation technologies through the Small Business Innovation Research and Small Business Technology Transfer programs. These initiatives provide funding for early-stage research and development across a variety of mission areas, from health to agriculture to energy, fueling the commercialization of federal investments in research and development. Governments should similarly empower people to develop the skills necessary to make the most of emerging technologies. All stakeholders should work together and share best practices to encourage approaches across the globe that will lead to greater prosperity for all of us. The United States is continue to be committed to active multi-stakeholder engagement and public participation to promote accountability, optimize decision-making, recognize potential risks associated with new technologies as they arise, but also to foster public trust and keep abreast of the latest research. This is why this forum is so important and continue to bring together representatives from multiple sectors, governments, and backgrounds to share best ideas to harness STI for development. So thank you very much for the broad array of insights that the panelists have provided us, and I would encourage all of us to continue to focus on the opportunities, not just on the challenges. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. We have, I am told, at most 10 minutes. We cannot go beyond that. And I have several speakers asking to take the floor. So I won't be able to give the floor to everyone. I rely on your understanding. At most, we may have 3 minutes each. So kindly be cooperative. I call on Mr. Tony Vines, Hunting Group.
Raise your arm. Now you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Tony Wines from Turnkey.
2 minutes.
Thank you. We focus very much deeply into the analytics side of the ESG and the SDG part of the environmental part of the sustainability sector. We strongly believe that the analytics and technologies that are available now can drive better adoption globally and regionally. Our focus is predominantly to work on the supply chain to help internal organizations and external organizations to drive better adoption throughout the entire supply chain. We need to look at quantifiable data and allow that data to be measured and adopted within an SDG framework. We hope to be able to see far better adoption of SDGs through that framework and through the adoption of governance within the SDG network. For that, we need detailed analytical data, and we support that through environmental, social, and governance reporting. We also believe that organizations that are driving SDGs within the Technological Forum need to see the upside on financial benefits within their organizations, and we focus heavily on trying to drive financial upside through the data that we provide to organizations. And we hope to see that the SDG network and the SDG modules will be the key focal point to drive improvements in both financial and governance within the financial sector going forward. Thank you very much.
Thanks to you. I now give the floor to Ms. Kathy Ellen Singer, seated in 2545. You have the floor.
Thank you. I'm Katie Singer with the EMR Policy Institute.
2 minutes, please.
Sure. My concern is that every online activity requires infrastructure and data centers and then embodied energy, which is the energy that goes into manufacturing every device. All of these processes require massive amounts of electricity that generates greenhouse gases, water, and conflict minerals. It generates tremendous amounts of electronic waste per person per year. The internet could generate 3.5% of greenhouse gas emissions. That's more than the aviation and shipping industries by 2020, and 14% by 2040. Wireless technologies consume at least 10 times as much energy as wired technologies. What can we do? Service providers must use renewable energy. They must not beam the internet from space, since launching thousands of rockets could degrade the ozone layer, impact atmospheric heating, and speed climate change. Municipalities must take ownership of our power companies, provide fiber optics to the premises as a public utility, ban Bitcoin mining. At recycling centers, let robots mine reusable metals from discarded electronics so that every municipality can generate income. And this is actually much more sustainable than mining raw materials. Individuals, we must beware that every video uses much more data and thereby much more electricity and thereby emits much more CO2 than talking. So minimize videos, minimize pop-ups and slideshows, link and embed videos rather than repost them. Manufacturers must make modular, repairable, wired, and recyclable electronics that reuse functional components. We must collaborate, corporations must collaborate with multiple companies to require suppliers to disclose all chemicals and use safer alternatives. They must buy raw materials and parts only from sources that verify worker protections. Thank you.
Thanks to you. I now give the floor to South Africa for 2 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. South Africa thanks the United Nations for hosting this forum as it reaffirms the role of science, technology and innovation in implementing the SDGs. In order to capitalize on the potential of STI to accelerate development, especially in Africa, we need effective platforms for disseminating existing research and innovation. In this regard, the most recent Africa Regional Forum on Sustainable Development recommended the creation A, of an African STI multi-stakeholder forum, and B, the creation of an African platform for research and innovation exchange. South Africa is currently piloting the latter in the form of a national platform for research and innovation exchange called the South African SDG Hub. This network of online and face-to-face platforms is supported by the Department of Science and Technology, and South Africa would gladly share lessons learned with interested partners.
Finally, le doy la palabra a...
I call on Brazil.
Thank you, Ms. Here. Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to thank the panelists for the very interesting questions, as well as the audience, and to say that if we are in a fourth industrial revolution indeed, it's important to learn with the previous ones, particularly on which are the structural challenges that have prevented us from universalizing the second and the third resolution so far, considering that we don't have yet toilets for everybody in the world. The UN has a word on sanitation on that, a work on sanitation. And the digital divide, the third revolution, is growing between countries and between men and women. So I think the first point would be to address those structural challenges that relate with inequalities and developing capacities in developing countries. Another point would be, as Thomas mentioned, the idea of layers, because the discussion is so broad that we can get lost. So which layer are we discussing? And I would also add which time frame. Here at the STI Forum, we are focused on the 2030 time frame. So the future of humanity discussion is very important, but it's more comprehensive, and we need to focus more on short-term and long-hanging fruit. And also for that, we have the goals already settled. So on the regulation discussion, which is already also important, of course, this cannot hijack the fact that we already have defined multilateral goals, which are the SDGs. And when discussing STI, we need to think on how to serve those already agreed goals. So we already know what we want, we need to enable it. My final point would be that in doing so, we need to consider both the risks and opportunities and not adhere or to techno-optimism or techno-pessimism, and deal with it in a way that is very inclusive and paying attention to developing countries. Thank you.
Gracias a usted.
Thank you.
Give the floor to our panelists. I will start for last comment. 1 minute, I'm sorry, but just 1 minute. To Ms. Sara Alamiri.
Thank you. With regards to STI and with regards to moving forward with this forum, better understanding on how we as the UN could contribute to the Sustainable Development Goals and how each country can contribute to the development and attaining the SDGs through scientific and technological advancements. We heard from several countries the different initiatives that are ongoing with regards to that, but putting together solutions for the developing world, giving them access to technologies, giving them access to know-how, and with the basic sense with lessons learned, so that technologies could be adopted and then further enhanced and developed for the benefit of each nation moving forward. Thank you.
Thanks to you. Now, Mr. Thomas Philbeck.
Thank you. In terms of moving forward and speaking directly about how do we address the SDGs, we see a tension between the risks and opportunities. There's a lot of opportunities in terms of developing answers to questions about how do we deal with poverty, or how do we deal with clean energy or water, but there are more risks on the other side of those technologies, about jobs, about meaningful work, about what happens to the oceans, etc. As we go forward, if we can think about how do we strategically consider the standards of the technologies, as our panelists here from ICANN mentioned, if we can think about how do we develop governance in line with societal values, and if we can think about how do we build and invest infrastructure that gives back to the communities around us and invests heavily in education, those are three main things that I think maybe we could do to start to move forward. Thank you.
Thanks to you. And now Mr. Gordon Marby.
Thank you. I would like to repeat the road to hell is paved with good intention part of my speech. Because in the discussions we always focus on things that are bad on the internet, which I agree with. ICANN doesn't participate, we don't have nothing to do with the content of the internet. But in the efforts to try to get away from sort of those bad things, there is a risk that legislation or proposal for legislation can actually harm the interoperability of internet, the thing that makes internet something that you can use every day. Important that we engage also from our side, the technical community, in the discussions, just not to validate the policies by themselves, but also take part so the good is not disappearing. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. We have come to the end of this panel. I'm not going to summarize, but I do believe there were 3 or 4 points of consensus. One, something is happening. This accelerated change does have consequences. Governments and the UN must redouble efforts to prepare and adopt the best possible public policies to get benefits and reduce risk. There is one on which they agree. The answer is education, education, education.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much.
This panel. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
I thank our moderator and our modelists for this great wealth in the panel.
Would you please take your seats? Would you please take your seats? We're continuing. We don't have much time.
Please take your seat.
Although the interpreters are staying until 1:10.
1:10. Uh-huh. you change? I will start. Yeah. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I invite the forum to begin its session 2 for the purpose of holding an interactive dialogue with the 10-member group to support the technology facilitation mechanism. I'm pleased to now welcome the following esteemed speakers that comprise the 10-member group for the period of 2018 to 2019. Dr. Paulo Gadelha, coordinator of the Fiocruz strategy for the 2030 agenda of the Oswaldo Cruz Foundation of Brazil. Professor Huadong Goho, chairman of the academic committee at the Institute of Remote Sensing and Digital Earth of the Chinese Academy of Sciences. Dr. Heide Hackman, executive director of the International Council for Science of South Africa. Dr. Agnes Lawrence Kijozi, Director General of the Tanzania Meteorological Agency. Dr. Jose Ramos Lopez Portillo Romano, Chairman of Q Element. Dr. Michiharu Nakamura, Senior Advisor and former President of the Japan Science and Technology Agency. Dr. Anne-Christine Lichkov, the Senior Advisor at the VTT Technical Research Center of Finland Limited. Dr. Spes Stress, Head of Innovation and Technology Transfer Center for Josef Stefan Institute of Slovenia. Dr. Von Trekian, Senior Director at the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine of the United States. And Dr. Ada Jonas, Nobel Laureate in Chemistry and Director of the Helen and Milton A. Kimmelman Center for Biomolecular Structure and Assembly of the Weizmann Institute of Science of Israel. It is with pleasure that I turn the meeting over to our moderator, Mr. George XV, Director of the Science and Technology Policy Research Institute of Ghana, and member of the 10-member group of 2016 and 17, to conduct the proceedings of the session 2. Mr. XV, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. And I wish to reiterate the point that His Excellency made, that the 10-member group is a very important integral part of the technology facilitation mechanism. And we think that it is important we all understand this and the roles that they play, the strengths that they bring to the technology facilitation mechanism, bringing their various expertise and their various interests into the 10-member group work and processes. And so with that, we are going to get them to introduce themselves with special emphasis on the strengths that they bring to the 10-member group. Yes, indeed, His Excellency has mentioned their names and their positions, but we want to know them in order that we can go into an effective, interactive session for the time that we have at hand. And so, Your Excellencies, I would want to invite them. We are going to begin with the chair, the co-chairs. We have two co-chairs, and they would do the introduction and let us understand the rules and the particular strengths they are bringing to the 10-member group. So I invite them to take the floors.
Thank you very much. My name is Agnes Kijaz. I'm the Director General of Tanzania Meteorological Agency. And my background is on climate science. I'm pleased to be co-chair of this group. Coming from Africa, it will be a good position for me to advise on the available technologies in developing countries and specifically least developed countries, and how these technologies they can be harnessed and contribute to the sustainable development of these countries. As we all aware that not all available technologies existing in the globe can be directly applied to these countries. Through the discussions we have seen that there are challenges of infrastructure in these countries. There are challenges of capacity, human capacity to utilize these technologies. So I think it's a good opportunity for me to bring what is in the least developed countries and how we can use it to ensure that we assist these countries to implement the sustainable development goals. It is important that technology transfer being always accompanied with innovation capacity. So for sustainability, it's important to build capacity of these peoples, specifically in least and in developing and least developed countries, to be able to sustain technologies that are transferred to them. And not only to sustain, but also to be able to use these technologies. So with my experience and networking I have, I'll be in a good position to advise on how to assist the least developed countries to implement these development goals. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And so we go to the next co-chair, please.
Ambassador, Excellency Ambassador Sandoval, Excellency Ambassador Hoshino, I'm Vaughn Tarikian, and I also have the pleasure with my colleague Agnes to serve as a co-chair of this 10-member group. And I will say that I come to this from a position of having sat up there where you are sitting, co-chairs. And even though the view might be better from up there, the relaxation from sitting down here is much better. And you are both to be congratulated along with your colleagues at DESA, along with the colleagues in ECOSOC and your colleagues in the interagency task team for putting together a wonderful event. It is really the goal and the role of this group, the 10-member group, to serve as that interface, to serve as the interface between the UN bodies that are designed and created to put together this forum as part of the technology facilitation mechanism and the broader science, technology, and innovation community. And so without going into too many details about our vision, I would really say that one of the most critical roles that we have and that we hope that we can play for so many people in this room and beyond is as that conduit and as a group that can help reflect the vast amount of expertise that exists within the science, technology, innovation community, particularly outside of governments, so that we can make sure that the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, are equipped with the greatest knowledge, the greatest capacity that exists not only within governments, but critically outside of governments. And we look forward to working with you. Our colleagues are tremendous in their expertise, and they will speak for themselves. But we look forward to working with you and for this grand effort. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So now you know the chairs, Mr. Vaughan Tarikian and Ms. Agnes Kijazi. And I think that you would agree with me. We've done justice to ensuring that the chairing is properly done across the various parts of the world. Now we are going to get to listen to the rest of the 10-member group, and we would want to ask that each of them, the rest that are here, would speak in 1.5 minutes so that we can engage quickly with the stakeholders who are here. In fact, this is meant to be an interactive session. It's an interactive dialogue, so we want to give opportunity to those who are here to be able to engage with the members. And so please, the rest of you, with all due respect, if you can do your speech in 1.5 minutes, we'll be very grateful. Thank you.
Because, are you getting me? I'm a bit speechless, not because of the emotion, but I'm having an allergy. It will be very hard to say what was this experience of working for 2.5 years with my colleagues, and George was part of this as a 10-member group, and now having a second mandate. I'm a former president of Fiocruz, which is a major Brazilian health and STI institution. And one of the strong points I'm trying to bring in this work is to think of how health is essential in terms of interacting with all the other SDGs. First, because it's a human right. It has a very important role in terms of platforms for innovation, and also it's a very important aspect of economic development. Since it is in the case of Brazil or of OCDE, we have about 10% of GDP involved with health. Well, 1.5 minutes is all we can just say hello, goodbye, and we'll be always very much available to be summoned by all the stakeholders, all the institutions from UN, to try to help building networks and also having our expertise to have a more coordinated work in terms of STI and SDGs. Thank George.
Thank you very much for the hello.
Your Excellency, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Hua Dongguo, a professor from the Chinese Academy of Sciences. Presently, also I serve with a number of the organizations relevant to today's meeting, including the International Society for Digital Earth, the International Committee on Remote Sensing of Environment, and the International Center on Space Technology and Natural and Heritage and Cultural Heritage. My background is observation, and especially in remote sensing information mechanism, radar for observation, and digital earth science. Recent years, my favorite research direction is big data, especially for bigger Earth data. So the LTI forum provides a wonderful platform for all stakeholders. This platform offers the opportunity for us to exchange ideas, how to use science, technology, and innovation, especially the new technology, facilitate the SDIs. So it's my honor to work with you to contribute to sustainable goals development. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Señores vicepresidentes, moderador.
Thank you, moderator. I'm the only one in the group whose mother tongue is Spanish. I was born in Mexico, but I live in England, and I've had the good fortune of being involved in many activities, politician, civil servant, diplomat, president of part of FAO, an academic, and businessman, all of which gives me a multifaceted overview of the issues involved in technological change and the work of our group. The way I see this is in a book that I've just published on these matters, where I try to review the various growth technologies and what the various experts see as the socioeconomic consequences of these changes with a specific case of a study in Mexico in the Latin American context. And I make a series of proposals related to what's happening here. I was fortunate enough to be invited by the government of Mexico to take part in working out the solutions of the impact of this rapid technological change on SDGs. Those goals are part and parcel of the concept of this accelerated technology change, and we have to give them the priority they deserve. I argue in the book that that priority is at least as great as climate change itself, because it is going to affect all of our activities. And I think that the UN can contribute a great deal in two ways. First, in establishing, by compiling and analyzing information, the problems and specific opportunities embodied in this change. And secondly, to promote having this reflected in public policies. I think this involved, if we really want to give it the necessary priority, it means we have to empower this forum and our group. The huge importance of these topics deserves it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And so we move to the next person.
Moderator, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Michiharu Nakamura, Senior Advisor, Japan Science and Technology Agency. I was the former president of JST and also the board members and the executive vice president of Hitachi. Today, we are expected by global society to make social transformation through science, technology, and innovation with deep insights towards a future sustainable society. My experience so far teach me that STI for SDGs is not achievable only by technological progress, but also we need economic and social transformations. So STI for SDG is achievable by multi-stakeholders' effort. The mission of a 10-member group, ourselves, is to become a catalyst for mobilizing multi-stakeholders' experiences and expertise coherently. The STI for SDGs roadmaps, which have been discussed in many occasions so far, is an example. We have been working on this for last several months to make a real step to implement STI for SDG roadmap. It's a necessary tool for communication among multi-stakeholders, and also, of course, a tool for tracking the progress. And this will be discussed at tomorrow's session 6. Towards the first milestone of SDGs next year, we have to accelerate our agendas on the tables. I'm more than happy to serve as a member of 10-member group to support the technology facilitation mechanism. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Two more, and then we'll go into interaction.
So, Your Excellencies, Mr. Moderator, my name is Ann-Kristin Richkoff. I'm coming from Finland. I'm a senior advisor at VTT Technical Research Center of Finland in the field of bioeconomy and circular economy. I promote all the sustainable solutions and radical innovations for the benefit of the society and economy by integration of different competencies and disciplines in order to overcome those huge challenges what we are having in this planet related to sustainability issues. Due to my previous position as a CTO of VTT, I have a very solid background and insight of different technologies and scientific alternative disciplines and how to integrate them in order to get the solutions. I have had many national and international positions of trusts, and all the knowledge and expertise I have gained in these positions, I'm happy to bring to this 10-member group and for the benefit of UN and this world. So I'm very happy and honored to be one of the members of this 10-member group. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The last one.
Good morning, everyone. Hello? Yeah. Good morning, everyone. My name is Špela Stres. I come from a small country in Central Europe, Slovenia, so I don't have the benefit of speaking in my own language, but nevertheless, lepo pozdravljeni. I work for Jože Stefan Institute as head of the Innovation Center. And what I can bring to the 10-member group is my international experience, predominantly within the European Commission and European Union. As a board member and former vice president of Association of Science and Technology Professionals of Europe, as a member of the board of CERN Technology Transfer Network. I'm also involved in setting up the responsible research indicators for the European Commission, which could play an important part also within the technology facilitation mechanism for the United Nations. Technology transfer and innovation has always been very important for me, coming from a small country in Central Europe, as I said, and only a member for the European Union for the past 14 years. We are nevertheless playing an important role in the integration, for example, of the Western Balkans, also in terms of establishing technology transfer mechanisms there. I'm deeply honored to be a member of this 10-member group, and I'm honored to offer my services to the TFM for the next 2 years. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And so we have had the introduction from the members who are here. I must make apologies for two of them. Ms. Heide Hackman, Executive Director of the International Council for Science, and we also have Ms. Ada from Israel, who unfortunately also had to go back. And so they are not here with us now, but the rest of them, you've heard them, you realize that they come into the 10-member group with high expertise in their various fields. You notice that there has been a conscious effort for balance regionally as well as by gender. And so please now it's your turn to engage with them, interact with them, spell out some of the issues you'd want them to focus on as they go into their term of office. And since we gave them only 1.5 hours to 1.5 minutes to make their speech, not hours, please. 1.5 minutes to make their speech, you may want to make your points in half a second. Thank you. Thank you very much. All right. So let's see. I recognize stakeholder 9, Mr. Tom Wakefield. Please take the floor.
Okay. So the chef de cabinet talked about the overall SDG of no one being left behind, and the next speaker talked about reaching those left furthest behind first. It conjures up the image of a running race where you give the weakest at the back of the race trainers, then that magically make them into